What matters most? What matters most to you? Do you check in on that? Or do you go about life and living it? And look at maybe the lack of the things that matter most. We live in an infinite universe of infinite possibilities. Yet often we underutilize our power to co-create, our power of intention, our power of agreement. Sometimes we inherit what we think matters most, and we just go along with that, rather than pausing and stopping to think that we are the architect. We are the one who gets to decide and define what matters most. So have we taken the time to really make an assessment about that? To really look and say, this is my definition of success. These are my values. This, to me, is the greatness of being alive and what I'm here for, what I'm about. And maybe we think we've done that. Maybe there was a time where we had a conversation or had a thought and we really dove into that. But I challenge us to consider that unless it is a mindful process that we re-engage with from time to time, we forget to dive back into the inner landscape and create from the moment we are at now. Have you ever met anyone that had a dream, had a vision that they've been holding to for a long time? This was a value, a way they wanted to contribute to the world. It was something that, they had talked about for so long. And then it's finally coming into fruition. Finally, it's here. And all of a sudden, as it's here, their energy starts shifting. And they are not as interested, not as alive with, not as excited about what they thought they were attached to. I had that experience with a friend that was writing a book. This friend had talked for a lifetime about being an author. And then finally, here comes the contract after years and years and years. And I'm watching this friend start the book and really put things into motion and write it and do it and turn things in and have people chop them up and edit it and send it back and go, okay, like this. I'm watching and seeing them put this hours and this time and these deadlines and all of this and watching them just get smaller and smaller and to the point where we did a check-in. Is being an author and writing a book still in your heart? Is that still a vision? And even now that you have information, more information about what that's like, how do you feel about that? I have another friend who is a children's book author, and she said that oftentimes people have this idea of what it's going to be like. She said, but when you're the author or the illustrator, you don't often get to interact with the other. So you have to launch it and let go. So imagine if you wrote a children's book, but you didn't get to take the whole rest of the picture from in your mind. Only what was in your words got communicated, and then someone else's creativity is what draws all the images and the pictures. And lifting that off. She said a lot of times that blows people's ideas about thinking they want to do it. But so often we go on autopilot thinking we are living our values, living our vision, without checking in. So can we pause to remember that we are the yardstick by which we live our life? We are the ones that create consciously. And it's ours to check in on that. You define it. You define your values. And when we define our values, we prioritize those above others. Even by defining them, our subconscious mind can start to operate from that place when it's truly, truly, truly what we are about and what we value. Our actions begin to align with those things. But sometimes we have to start looking at our lives first and backtrack to find our values. Backtrack to find what we began to give life to. Backtrack to find what our vision actually is. And sometimes when we find that vision that we have launched, we are deeply disturbed. There's a sacred passage in Scripture that says, when you seek and you will find, when you find you will be disturbed. It can be disturbing to see how we've used our creative faculties, to see how we've used our mental and emotional and spiritual system to create that which is unlike what we're really wanting to prosper, to demonstrate, unlike what feels like abundance, right? So are we willing to check in? Are we willing to look at what is happening in our lives and backtrack? How are we spending our time? Really, how are we spending our time? If you had someone watching you constantly, like say listening through your phone or watching through the camera on your computer or your TV and taking notes, just say, then they pull up a document to say, this is how this person spends their time. They spend this much of it complaining, this much of it worrying, this much of it loving, this much of it hugging, this much of it sleeping, this much of it dreaming, this much of it praying, this much of it visioning, this much of it in, oh, pity, pity, pity me, whatever it is. They do it, like at the end of the year when you get your credit card slip and it makes a pie chart. Anyone have that? It's a pie chart, and it's like, here's how much you spent on travel, here's how much you spent on food, here's how much you spent on, right? That's the inventory we're called to. Because sometimes when we check in, we realize I am not about those things. I am not about those things. But we're acting like we are. We're showing up like we are. And in unity, that's what we call alignment. When we talk about alignment, we talk about stepping into our values and saying, be in me, the presence that gets in line with what I am truly about. Let that carnal nature or that weakness or that limitation in the mind, the human condition, let that be subservient to the spiritual power, my intention, my agreement. So that I can, and it's not a blame thing, right? Because we are like kind of automatic beings, right? We have that earthy nature that we just do what we do. But it is the spiritual nature that comes in to do an assessment. It's the spiritual nature that comes in to say to the whole rest of our being, come into alignment with me. So how are we doing with the pie chart? With our time, with our talent, and with our treasure? Do we make time for our spiritual practice? Is it really a priority? Do we spend time in meditation? Is that something that is at the top of the list? Do we spend time visioning and activating our good? Do we spend time consciously releasing thoughts of lack and limitation and allowing them to drift from our being? Do we spend time consciously doing that? And is that a deep value that has a priority? Or does that get pinched out? Does that get pinched out by all the little things? Our talent. Do we actually presence what is in our hearts and take the risk of sharing that? Do we actually look at, take time for, develop our spiritual gifts, our creativity? One of the things that I'm clear about when looking at our consciousness of our source is that for many of us, through our spiritual gifts, that is how we awaken to the knowing that we are one with something and a fullness that is so magnificent. It is beyond this mind's idea of how it could even comprehend. But for me, that came through awakening spiritual gifts. And when I say that, I don't mean like some mystic guru thing. I mean like picking up a guitar and playing and entering in a zone where you're kind of creating a lyric, but you're also kind of listening to one and pulling it in. It's the same thing that mathematicians have felt in dreams where they get equations. They're dreaming about equations that solve issues in the world. It's the same thing of a chemist or a scientist that gets into a zone when they're looking for a cure for something. They're pulling it through. It's the same thing as an artist who comes awake and when they're painting, time stops. It's the same thing as a photographer who didn't even know they were a photographer that unfolds a whole new leaf of life that was not before available to them because they had no idea they even had a gift or that they could get this type of presence, experience, passion, wholeness from expressing something? Are we giving time for our gifts? Or are we going through the motions of life and doing what we inherited, which is, this is what your life is about. You're a human being. You need a house. You need a job. Put this on the table. Do this, do that, do this, do that. Just because that's how it's always been done, or that's how we witnessed it. And then there is your treasure, our finances. Do we consider our finances to be a problem? Do we consider them to be something that we're hoarding, grabbing onto? Or do we consider our finances to be a part of our spiritual practice? A part of our spiritual practice, that in fact they come from what I give. Everything that comes to me in the way of finances comes from me putting who I am, my life force, my energy field into circulation. And as I put it into circulation, so do I receive. Do I take that as a spiritual practice? When I'm writing my bills, do I bless them and give thanks that there is a system where I am able to get something before I even pay for it? What kind of a system is that? It's like we got a lot of buddies out there, a lot of moms and dads letting us borrow stuff. Hey, could I borrow your electricity for a little bit? And I'll pay you for it in a little while. I'll pay you later. Do we do that when we get our credit cards? When we get our bill, do we sign it? Do we send it off? Do we click it with gratitude? With thanks? As if there's a person over there that just said, do you need this month? Here you go. Go ahead, get it. We'll take care of it later. Do we source what spiritually nourishes us? The idea of tithing, the idea of what comes in to do an inventory. And Joel Osteen says, give according to your income with the goal of tithing, which is 10% of what comes in. But he says, give according to your income. Don't just do it haphazardly. Be conscious about it, even if it's 1%, if it's 3%, whatever it is, and give according to your income to where you're spiritually fed, where you're nourished, and see what shifts. Because when we do that, we say to all of the rest of the funds that come into us, we say, through this consciousness, by this consciousness, you will operate. And the fear that is released when that happens is unbridled. It is something will catapult us into a new way of being. And once we master that, once we master money, all sorts of things can happen. Things that we may thought weren't possible before. We start thinking differently. We even start saving differently. We start recognizing that, when I give a child a gift, maybe rather than just give them something that's disposable and that when I'm gone is going to be in a landfill, I might put $5 in a savings fund for them for whatever it is that's my value. Maybe that's college. Maybe that's a spirit fund. Maybe that's a trip. Whatever it is, but something that made me come alive that I want to make sure to pass on. And I'm not going to pass up that opportunity. I am instead going to recognize that when I make something a practice, when I make it a practice that aligns with my values, I can create something that I couldn't have otherwise created. Something that if I tried to do it just because I said, oh, you know what, I want to send you to college, I might not be able to come up with the funds to do that. But if I start a magnet, a small intention, and then I fuse with it my activity, my action, my gifts, I create a consciousness. I create a magnet that then other things flow into that. It's a container to which things flood into. That's visioning, friends. When we vision, we don't need all of the details. When we vision, we don't need all of the resources. But we certainly need to launch the container. And we often, in the human condition, fail to do that, do we not? So I invite us today to think about a vision for ourselves, to think about a vision for our world, and to step into a greater idea of what is possible. In Matthew 6:33, it says, "Seek ye first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you." I challenge us to seek a value-based vision. A value-based vision. That is a vision that is beyond the material. Certainly, the material will come. Certainly, we may vision it. But when we vision about the material, vision it with an open hand of surrender, not with a clutching grasp. Because the material comes and goes. And in fact, even what we want as far as the material changes, doesn't it? I was saying to someone recently that, one of my ideas about abundance and prosperity is having fabulous people in my life, which I am blessed to have a whole bunch of them. Because what I know about myself is I'd love to go out on a boat and take a float and do all of that, right? But me owning that boat, I already have a nail in my tire that I've been driving around with for 3 weeks and just pumping up with air. Owning a boat is not something that I need to take on. But when you've got good friends in good places, when you live in the spirit of generosity and abundance, you feel wealthy even if your hands are holding nothing. The master teacher was one of the greatest stewards of abundance, walking here in this realm of consciousness to demonstrate abundance, yet owned nothing. Owned nothing. So can we launch a vision for ourselves that is value-based? That is value-based. I challenge us to think about a couple of things. There's an author, Mark Manson. I'm getting into one of his books. And he talks about taking radical responsibility for our lives, defining what we care about, really defining what we care about, and to stop leaking our energy and wasting our time on things that we don't value. Think about that for a second. If we really got clear, if I don't value it, guess what? I can't. I'm not even going to invest my time. And he talks about valuing a little bit different than the ideas we may have heard before. He said that great values are reality-based, socially constructive, and immediate and controllable. They're reality-based, socially constructive, immediate and controllable. So values such as curiosity, he says, honesty, creativity, these are values that I am in control of. I can activate, they're within me. They're not external, they're not things. He gives an example, like being popular, something like that. That's a value you can't control, right? That's a value of sense perception. That's a value of ego mind. It's a value that's outside of your being. Can we take on value-based visioning that has to do with truly how we show up, who we want to be in this world, and what we want to offer up and offer out? And then all of the details, hold them with hands open. I believe that when we do this, we rise into a new state of consciousness that is like a magnet for the good that we are seeking. And if we focus on the giving nature of ourselves, creating, giving, circulating, then we will be amazed moment by moment, day by day, year by year at that which comes to us and comes through us. In the Unity magazine in 1930, purchased for 15 cents. On the back cover, there's a reading, a poem, an anonymous poem. Rise up and say, the trouble I think with us all is the lack of high conceit. If each man thought he was sent to this spot to make it a bit more sweet, how soon we could gladden the world, how easily right all wrong, if nobody shirked and each one worked to help his fellow along. Cease wondering why you came. Stop looking for faults and flaws. Rise up today in your might and say, I am part of the first great cause. However full the world, there is room for an earnest man. It had need of me, or I would not be. I am here to strengthen the plan. Namaste.